Funding for Building New York is provided by First American Title Insurance Company of New York.
Welcome to Building New York. My name is Michael Stoller. 55 years ago, a 6-month-old Greek boy came to New York City. He moved to 135th Street in Lewiston Stadium, right near the City College. 55 years later, this individual is one of the largest employers in the tri-state area, with companies grossing in excess of $3 billion. I'd like to introduce and thank John Castimatidis, chairman of the Red Apple Companies, for being here today.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, John. John, you came over here when you were 6 months old. Your father was a waiter. He worked in Longshamps, which is no longer in business. And you, at the age of 14, got involved working in politics, you said to me the other day.
Well, there was something in my blood, I guess, so that I enjoyed politics, and I still enjoy it. I was 14 years old, and I went to work in the office of Congressman William Fitzryan. And I worked for him during the summer, and I worked for him part-time, and I enjoyed politics.
And you told me when you were 17, you were nominated to go to West Point?
The congressman gave me the congressional nomination to West Point during my junior year at high school, or my senior year, and I guess we were set to go. And
then after that, you decided to go to NYU because you wanted to remain. You were the only child of your mother and father, and you wanted to remain in the area. And you went to NYU to be an engineer.
Yes.
And while you were going to NYU, studying for an engineer, you took a job in a supermarket.
Well, you have to earn a living. My father only made $100 a week, and what are you going to do? You're going to tell him, give me $20 of your $100 to put gasoline in my car? And I took a job working in a superette. I don't think it even qualifies.
The superette was where?
Right by City College, 137th Street and Broadway.
So it was different than what you own today with Castimatidis.
Yes.
And you were 8 credits short of graduation. You were working at a cousin's superette?
Well, that came later on. I was working during my freshman year, junior year, sophomore year, junior year, and in my senior year, this person I was working for asked me to take over his share of another supermarket, that he was partners with his uncle.
And that supermarket was where?
100th Street and Broadway, and it was called 7-Eleven.
And did it have any affiliation with the 7-Eleven chain?
None whatsoever, but Tony, who built it, had the strange idea that if he named it 7-Eleven, 7-Eleven couldn't come to New York.
And what happens at your 20th, you were 20 years of age, and you're ready, 8 credits short of graduation, Tony tells you what's happening then? Well,
engineers at that time, when you own a store already in your senior year.
No, wait, you hadn't. I
owned it in my senior year.
So what happened? Somebody gave you the opportunity to buy into the store?
No, Tony was having big arguments with his uncle that if Tony would have bought 20 cases of oranges, his uncle would say, "Why did you buy 20? You should have bought 10. They're going to go rotten." If he would have bought 10, his uncle used to yell and scream, "That was a great price. You should have bought 20. So he couldn't do anything right. So he wanted out. So there was an opportunity.
So at 20 years of age, this Greek kid gets this opportunity to buy 50% of a store on 100th Street and Broadway.
Yes.
And the price?
Well, it's pay me later. $10,000, pay me $1,000 a month for 10 months.
So pay you later. So at 20 years of age, you own 50% of 7-Eleven or whatever type of supermarket.
Yes.
And you're ready to graduate.
Well,
And-
yeah. You know, but during my senior year, I was going to school full time, working to 1 o'clock in the morning every morning, getting up to go to produce market at 4 o'clock in the morning, and going to class at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I was in a
You were in a 24/7
routine.
cycle.
But it came time, you know, the store became successful, and all of a sudden I was making $500 a week, and engineers were making $165 a week. I didn't want to take a pay cut.
So this is the start of how John Castimatidis got involved with the supermarket trades. But isn't it interesting that you told me the other day that this location on 100th Street and 7th Avenue, you acquired this property later on in life?
Well, we actually we had the Superette on the north side of Broadway. We actually ended up buying the other supermarket out, which was across the street, which was the old Food Roundup and the Carlton Terrace Ballroom. And that was across the street from the original store.
And then what happens?
Well, we built it as a Red Apple supermarket because we had all the Red Apples on the west side.
And how did you come up with the name Red Apple?
Well, you know, along with good marketing, you know, you try to figure out what does the customer want. We had to come up with a name that's apple pie and ice cream on top. And that was a good all-American name.
So you created Red Apple, and you're 20 years of age, and over the next 5 years or 6 years, how many stores had you opened?
Well, let's see, I was 20 years old. By the age of 25, I think we opened about 8, 9, 10 stores. And we were already doing about 22, 23 million, $25 million a year in sales.
And the reason, at that time, supermarkets were only open 6 days a week, with the exception of John Castimatidis stores.
Well, a lot of people were mad at me. We were the first ones in New York, because New York had the blue laws, to open up 7 days a week.
And the story that you told me was you would cut the checks on Friday to pay the vendors.
Well, we were so poor that we wrote the checks on Friday to pay the vendors, you're correct. But we had to open up on Sundays to make sure there's enough money in the bank Monday to pay the checks.
Very interesting. Now, here's the interesting story. That supermarket that you owned, your first supermarket on 100th Street and Broadway, last year you sold that property.
Actually, the property across the street, which we had acquired, and opened up a larger store.
And how much was the cost of that initial building?
I think we bought it from the Alexander's family, the Farkas family originally.
Yeah, tell me about that. That's an interesting story.
Back in the 1970s, the Farkas family was thinking of building an Alexander's department store on 96th and Broadway, where the Columbia condo is now?
The site of the Zeckendorf building
Yes.
that was built on the corner over there.
And they were buying up all the land on the west side. And when they found out they couldn't build or they didn't want to build, they started selling off all the properties on the west side of Manhattan. And I think we acquired it for something like $400,000.
And how much did you sell it for last year?
Well, the effective number was about $42 million.
That's a good return.
Not bad.
I don't think that type of return you could see in the supermarket.
You'd have to run the supermarket for a long time to make the $42 million.
What happened later on? You know, you were in the supermarket, you're 27 years of age or 28 years of age, you have 14 supermarkets. All of a sudden you decided to get into some other businesses? You wanted to go into...
Well, we got into the real estate business, first of all, because we found out that the way you stay in the supermarket business long term is by owning the real estate. So in 1977, we started buying up a lot of real estate in New York. As everybody was selling, we were buying. I mean, we weren't smart enough to realize that we should be selling instead of buying, but it worked out well.
You know, at one time, people in the real estate trade says it's location, location, location. I think, and you and I think discussed this, it's really timing, timing, and timing. Because when you bought the property, many of your properties, you had no idea.
Nobody wanted it.
Nobody wanted these properties.
And I figured, if they had existing tenants, worst comes to worst, if the tenant went out of business, we'll open up another supermarket.
1979 was a turning time for you, right? You bought another chain, the supermarkets?
We got together. There was a public company called E&B Supermarkets at that time. And we got together with Bruce Llewellyn, who owned Fetco Foods at that time. And Bruce, Fetco Foods and Red Apple, we bought out E&B Supermarkets. And he took all the Bronx stores, I took all the Manhattan stores.
You always liked Manhattan.
I love Manhattan.
Now, in 1977, you did something else. I mean, what did you know about flying? What did you know about the airline business?
Nothing. I loved airplanes, though. And I always dreamed when I was growing up about being a jet pilot. And you can't start off flying a jet. And I never had the chance to go to the Air Force Academy, which a poor boy from 135th Street would dream about. So I said, well, I made a few dollars, let me learn to fly. So I started taking flying lessons in 1977. And
you bought a jet from Roy Disney?
My first jet I bought, I remember the call signs, 44RD, Romeo Delta, which was Roy Disney's Citation jet.
And what do you do with these jets? Here's a guy who's in the supermarket business, who's in the real estate business. Now you're in the airline business?
Well, it was a corporate jet business, and then you find out it's so expensive to run a corporate jet. You have to, and unless you're able to write it off, it doesn't really make any sense at that stage.
Now, the corporate jet business, where were these planes flying?
Well, you start off with one, and it was the same time that Atlantic City happened to open. And we made a deal with some of the casinos in Atlantic City because the casinos used to drive in limousines, or they're heavy players out of New York or out of New Jersey. But the players that were out of Connecticut or out of Massachusetts, they had to fly them in by private jet. So we started making deals, and we used to use our airplanes to fly in the customers into Atlantic City.
And over the years, from 1977 to how many years did you keep this?
We owned that company.
This was one of your first airline. We'll talk about your second airline business.
We owned that company for about 13 years. I got to fly. I got to fly all the jets, just about all of them. And we either owned or operated at least 40 corporate jets at the time. At the time we ended up selling it, and this was the forerunner to the company that Warren Buffett bought, NetJets. We had sold it to Mr. Santulli, I forget, about 1990, 91.
Now, in the mid-'80s, while you're running this charter airline business, running the supermarket business, then you decided to go you bought another airplane business?
Well, now we're in the real estate business, we're in the supermarket business, and people in the aviation industry knew we had a checkbook and we loved airplanes. And that's the worst thing for people to know, is that you have a checkbook. So all of a sudden I was approached in 1983, and we ended up buying, I think it was the 11th largest airline in the country at that time, Capital Airlines, headquartered out of Nashville area, Smyrna, Tennessee.
It's a nice place for a boy from Lewiston Stadium in 135th Street to move.
I had to learn how to eat catfish.
Yeah.
So me and a partner bought controlling interest of Capital Airlines, and I had to commute to Smyrna, Tennessee, which is a suburb of Nashville, in my jet to go to work Monday through Friday.
So now let's understand, at that time you have these Red Apple supermarkets,
yes.
You have the charter airline, you have Capital Air, and then suddenly you decide that you want to be in the oil business?
No, it didn't happen like that. Like every good airline business, when People's Express entered our markets, we realized the handwriting was on the wall. People's Express started flying, I forget, Chicago. Chicago was our best market. Los Angeles was the best market.
They were charging
Miami,
like $19?
$19, $29, $30. They were crazy. They were nuts. You couldn't put enough jet fuel in the airplanes. If you filled every seat twice, you couldn't pay for the fuel. but they were doing it. And we saw the handwriting on the wall, and we sold the airline back in September of '84, if I remember correctly.
And you had money.
We had money.
And you were buying some real estate, but you also said, I got to buy real estate with some oil?
Well, no. The people we sold the airline to, who was out of San Juan, Puerto Rico, they were funded by, remember, Drexel Burnham of Puerto Rico at that time. Like all good airline businesses, it took them at least 3 to 4 months to go bankrupt. And when they went bankrupt, we ended up in bankruptcy court trying to get back our airplanes because we kept the airplanes as collateral. Naturally, keep the airplanes as collateral.
John, you've always kept everything as collateral. That's why you own a lot of real estate.
So, on the way to bankruptcy court, we ended up buying an oil company.
Now, so you bought an oil company, and you bought the oil company. You made a great comment yesterday when we spoke that since you were selling Mazola oil, that wasn't too much different than selling regular oil.
Well, I remember it was a joke I made at that time, and when Chase Manhattan Bank was the lead creditor in the creditors committee, and they sat me down and they said, "Mr. Catsimatidis, what do you know about running an oil company?" And I said, "Mazola oil, crude oil. What is it to know? It's the same thing, isn't it?"
So now it's 1983. You got about 45 red apples.
Yeah.
And you still have the charter airline.
Well, when I returned, don't forget, when I lived in Smyrna, Tennessee, in Nashville for almost a year and a half, and I had offices all over the world. Yeah, I was 33, 34 years old. I had offices in Central America, all over Europe. I mean, that's a lot of power, a lot of experience for a 34-year-old gentleman, guy. And when we sold the airline, I had to come back to New York to run just a few stores. I was highly depressed.
So now you buy a refinery, and you also get some more real estate because you got, 300 convenience stores, mostly in Pennsylvania?
With all the real estate underneath of it, too.
So you get the refinery, and you get the land under the refinery. You then get 300, what are they called? Quick
Convenience stores.
Convenience
we
stores.
call them Quick Fill Red Apple now. Well, when I came back from Smyrna, Tennessee, and I was depressed and I wanted to buy other companies, I ended up buying 3 companies within 9 months, just to feel like I'm doing something. We bought Pantry Pride from Ron Perlman.
Now, the Pantry Pride was the forerunner. It was Food Fair. It was Food Fair, and then it became Pantry Pride, and that was based in Florida.
Florida. We controlled all the stores from Key West all the way up to Palm Beach, and that came with a lot of real estate. And we bought Castimatidis from the Southland Company, and we bought the oil company. So we went.
Okay, so Castimatidis, which is at 105 years of age, was started by the Castimatidis brothers.
Yes.
And you bought the Castimatidis from Southland.
Castimatidis brothers sold it to Southland about 1969. And then Southland decided, look, we got 8,000 convenience stores and only 40 or 50 supermarkets. We don't belong in the supermarket business. So I flew down to Dallas on a
I hope on one of
Monday
your own
morning.
planes.
Yes. We flew down on a Monday morning. We signed a letter of intent by Monday afternoon.
So now, in addition to the oil company, the quick stores, you all of a sudden have Castimatidis and the Red Apple stores.
Yeah, and Pantry Pride.
And Pantry Pride. And how many Castimatidis, because in the New York market at that time?
Well, I think between Castimatidis and Red Apple, we probably had about 80, 85 stores.
And
another 40, 45 stores in Florida under Pantry Pride.
And those you sold subsequently with the real estate and others?
Separately.
Separately.
You always sell separately.
Always sell separately. Now, it's 1987, and you decide to really diversify, and you go into the jewelry business.
Boy, what an accident that was.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, we belonged to this club with a bunch of friends of ours, and this opportunity came along, and with Bear Stearns to buy a small. You know, we had so much cash flowing around those days that we were making investments. You know, if you remember the days back in '87, '86, we were making $5 million investments here, five here, five here, five here. The people throwing around $5 million investments like it was chopped liver. And this opportunity came along, and we bought a little bit under 10% of this public jewelry company.
And from the public jewelry company, because it relates to another change in your life, you subsequently become the leading shareholder of this public jewelry company.
And subsequently become chairman.
And chairman. Now, did this jewelry company have real estate also?
It had it had a nice little piece of real estate on 47th Street.
Oh, so we had a piece of real estate in the the Diamond District.
And a few other pieces too.
Now, suddenly, you decide, now this is the supermarket, oil maven, everything else. You decide to take the money because you got rid of the jewelry company. You utilized the money and you made an investment in a bank.
Like I said, we were making a lot of investments.
And that bank was?
Well, us and a group bought First Woman's Bank, and we changed the name to First New York Bank. And I didn't plan to take an active role in it. I was just a member of the board and chairman of the executive committee at that point.
Did you have some real estate in that also?
No real estate.
No real estate. Now, subsequently, you become chairman of the board of the bank.
Well, when the government or the FDIC or whoever got mad at that chairman at that point, and the board had to ask him to leave, I became chairman by default almost.
And then you buy another thing, another piece of real estate. You decide to buy another supermarket chain.
Well, it just happened. Sloan's became available, and we ended up buying Sloan's in New York.
So now you have Red Apple, Castimatidis, Charles & Company
Yes.
in New York, and now you have Sloan's.
Yes.
And then the FTC says you have too many stores?
Well, Mark Green decided to file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission that we had too many stores, and the Federal Trade Commission was obligated to look into it.
Now, at this time, were you a public company or a private company?
We were a completely private company.
But you at one time were a public company?
No, we became public later on when we sold off the jewelry company, which was a public company. We decided not to be in the jewelry business. We sold off all the divisions. We sold it to some of them to Tiffany, some to other companies. And we had the public company as a shell with cash in it. And we were looking for an acquisition.
And the acquisition at that time?
It happened to be Sloan's, part of Sloan's.
Now let's look at what happened, because it really relates to the real estate. At this time, you made a decision to now you had leases. Some of the real estate assets were the properties, which you continue to own, and some of the properties were the leases under the long-term leases.
Yes.
And what did you do with Rite Aid?
Well, I was so annoyed. You know, when we bought Sloan's and we had Castimatidis and we had Red Apple, we had maybe 80, 90 locations. And I was so annoyed with the situation with the Federal Trade Commission, and we had to divest of some locations. I was annoyed at the situation of Mark Green complaining. And Rite Aid wanted to enter the market. So we ended up divesting of about 20, 25 locations to Rite Aid. And that's what gave Rite Aid the start of the drugstore business in New York City.
And over the years, you've still maintained the property. I mean, New York City has seen a resurgence all over. And in 1984, you bought a square block on Myrtle Avenue.
Oh, actually,
when the neighborhood was...
Actually, it was 2 blocks.
You bought 2 blocks.
Yeah, 2 blocks. 2 city blocks became available on Myrtle Avenue, and I think we paid like less than $600,000 for it.
And today, due to Mayor Bloomberg's zoning programs that have taken place, that property you can build, what, 1.1 million square feet?
1.1 million square feet, and I think Brooklyn's going through a great building stage. I think it's become more affordable, and it's only 10 minutes away from downtown Manhattan, and there's a resurgence going on.
And that property, you've been offered, what, 100 million?
Probably much in excess of 100 million.
And in the middle of all this, now, you decided you found another little property, which is right near Columbus Circle. You bought a property at 1790?
Yes, being a partner back in the late 80s or middle 80s, we bought an office building, 1790 Broadway, it's a great building. It used to be the U.S. Rubber Building. It's a landmark building, over 100 years old. And but Columbus Avenue was nothing 5-10 years ago. But all of a sudden, because what Related has been doing and what Zeckendorf is going to do with the Mayflower, that area has become, shall we say, a mecca.
So, John, you're truly a New York story.
I love New York.
You're a person who built New York, who's lived New York, who loves New York, and you are a true New York citizen. I mean, over the years, you've been friends to every politician. I mean, everyone knows you. You've given back. You're the chairman of Hellenic newspaper, and I'm really overjoyed that you were able to be my first guest.
Thank you.
On Building New York.
I love New York, and I've always lived in New York, and I guess I'll always live in New York.
And I thank you.
Thank you.
Funding for Building New York was provided by First American Title Insurance Company of New York.